Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Monday Morning Musing. Steve here, where we are continuing on the context and cultural issues related to the Eucharist or the Lord's Supper. On this issue, we're going to start, in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the function of slavery. Now, slavery is never a good thing. It's been around as long as human beings have been around. But one thing you can't do is you can't do a one-to-one comparison between the American experience for the African Americans and slavery in Rome. They were just different entities. Neither were good things. But Roman slaves had much different privileges and opportunities than the African American in North America, or primarily the United States. So, with that understanding, a Roman slave could be very well educated. He could be basically the paterfamilias, the head of the household. Depending on the capacity of that slave, could grant that slave incredible responsibilities and tasks and duties, other than just menial labor, is the connotation that we get from our American Western cultural experience. Basically, it would be like a household manager, even though part of the role of the wife in those days was to be literally the manager of the household. The lord of the household was the female role. Paterfamilias, yes, the male was the head, but in terms of the affairs of the house, that went to the female, the wife. And not all slaves were of equal status. So sometimes slaves had slaves. And there was even a hierarchy in the slaves, what slaves would do. Different ranks of slaves. So everything was about status to begin with. So even in slavery, there were different levels of the status for slaves. And at a banquet, it's an interesting kind of relationship between a slave and a guest. Each slave functioned within the banquet according to their abilities, skills, and capacities. Now, they were always subservient to the guests, but the guests were dependent upon the slaves to follow the slave's instructions. Like when the slave would guide you to where you would be seated, that the guest it was understood they would cooperate with the slave. And one of the lowest functions of a slave at a banquet would be the washing of the feet. And so that's why when Jesus did that at the Eucharist, for us, or at least for me growing up, there was a certain sentimentality associated with that. Oh, isn't that nice? Jesus taking the low place, Jesus washing everybody else's feet, taking the servant's towel. He's saying that he is taking upon himself the lowest rank possible in the room. It can't get any lower than the slave who washes the feet. This would have been, and it was, and we know from the scriptures, shocking, incomprehensible. This is not what happens at banquets. The master is honored. You're the honored guest. You're the one to be treated with special care and exhortation. So when Jesus did that, it was not just demonstrating an ethic that we're supposed to follow. It was an overturning of some of the deepest values of what it meant to function in their society. he was teaching. What kind of community, what kind of master, what kind of Lord are you? It would have been the most puzzling, maybe even disturbing activity that happened that night. And Peter, if even in pursuing humility, you can be arrogant. I know people who teach messages about humility and humility this and humility that and humility that. They're actually proud about how humble they are and about how their message of humility is so important. Well, that's just like Peter. Lord, if washing the feet is going to do something for me, just wash everything, because I want to be as humble as you are. I want to be. If you're the slave who determines cleanness, wash everything. Don't just wash my feet. Enough. And Jesus basically says, enough. Stop. You don't get it. So, not only were the slaves responsible for the seating arrangements, which we've already mentioned, they were done by rank, with the host determining who sat where. The honored position was on the right, and the lowest position would be at the end of the horseshoe on the side that would have been facing the symposiarch or the host or the special guest back. So the left end of the horseshoe that would have been looking at the back side of the guest at the center, that would have been the lowest ranking position. And there's some indication in the scripture where that maybe Peter was there and not too crazy about it, because he motions. There's a reference. He motions, says, hey, to somebody who is sitting, either John or whatever you want to believe, sitting next to Jesus on the right, say, hey. So it's like Peter is shouting or talking across the horseshoe, trying to get the attention of somebody who's closer to Jesus than he is. And if you think about a horseshoe format versus a linear table, it makes sense, because a horseshoe format, think about this, facilitates discussion because you can actually see each other. You're looking at each other's faces. Whereas if you're in that long linear, if you're at the end of the long linear table, like in Da Vinci's picture, the person at one end can't even hear the person at the other. So if a meal is about social interchange, which it was, the horseshoe makes complete sense. Now, remember the saying where Jesus says, don't take the best seats, because if somebody comes in later, remember I said somebody comes in later and you have to make room for them, it is better for you to be called up to a better seat than to have a better seat and be asked to move down. That's a great example in the scripture of this type of Roman banquet protocol being used by Jesus as a teaching. And it also shows that he and they function within that universe of understanding. Don't take the best seats. Because if you do, if you whisper into the ear of that slave and say, I am Bishop so-and-so, I'm Apostle so-and-so, well, that slave's no, don't do that. Take the low seat. And if you're honorable, and honor is another whole subject we could talk about forever, how important honor was in their society, it is better for you to be asked to be brought forward than be asked to be moved down. Now, I think we've covered everything that I need to cover regarding slaves. Oh, one thing I didn't mention is that it's highly likely that the host or the guest would be greeted with a kiss on the cheek. Right, that was the Eastern custom, and it's real interesting for me, for people who think every word of the Bible is the same, and we believe everything, we follow the Bible, and then here's a command in the Bible: greet one another with a holy kiss, and nobody does it. That's why fundamentalistic literalism is a joke, because they're selective like everybody else. Oh, that's cultural, we don't have to do that. Well, yeah, you decide it's cultural, and if I decide something else is cultural, I'm a heretic. But you're faithful to the Scripture. Everybody does it. There were cultural things. I haven't been in a church other than Eastern churches where there's a form of greeting one another with a kiss on the cheek, but the host may have, or the symposiarch, whoever was leading the meal, might have greeted the guests with a kiss. All right, that's it for this episode. I'll see you the next time.